Prior to the start of construction activities at a state highway construction project, the contractor is required to install a stabilized construction entrance at locations shown on the approved Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan or the approved Water Pollution Control Program document. A stabilized construction entrance is typically composed of a crushed rock layer over a temporary entrance fabric, which is referred to as a Type 1 stabilized construction entrance exit, or, based upon approval from the resident engineer, equipped with corrugated steel panels, which is a Type 2 stabilized construction entrance exit. These activities reduce the tracking of sediment from construction vehicles onto public roads. This best management practice should be implemented at construction sites as a preventative measure to minimize the tracking of soil onto public roads in areas where the site is adjacent to a water body, where poor soils are encountered, and where dust is a problem during dry weather conditions. When planning the stabilized entrance, it is important to walk the site and review the site plan to choose an area best suited for the entrance. Once a site is chosen, sweep the roadway adjacent to the area where the entrance will be installed, and ensure that all drain inlets are protected before construction begins. Although site conditions dictate design and need, the construction entrance design must support the heaviest vehicle and equipment that travels to the construction site. The access point should also be designed with a length of at least 50 feet, or 4 times the circumference of the largest construction vehicle tire, whichever is greater. Excavate the area to a depth of 12 inches, unless otherwise specified by a soils engineer. Also, grade the construction entrance point to prevent runoff from leaving the site. Runoff must also be routed from the stabilized entrance to a sediment trapping device before discharge. Then, make sure the area is cleared of all trash and debris. Since a temporary entrance fabric is used to prevent underlying soil from migrating into the void space of the rock, ensure that the ground surface is free of sharp objects that may damage or tear the fabric before placing the temporary entrance fabric. Position the temporary entrance fabric longitudinally along the alignment of the entrance, as directed by the resident engineer, and overlap the adjacent ends at a minimum length of 12 inches. Spread the rock onto the temporary entrance fabric in the direction of traffic to a depth of at least 12 inches, or to a depth recommended by the resident engineer. Caltrans requires that rock be approximately 3 to 6 inches in diameter. The selection of rock size should be based upon longevity, required performance, and site conditions. The use of asphalt concrete grindings for a stabilized construction access is not allowed. While spreading the rock, vehicles or equipment must not be driven directly on the fabric. Alternative stabilization methods, such as manufactured steel plates, require written approval from the resident engineer. For Type 2 construction entrances, a minimum of 6 coupled panel sections must be installed for each temporary construction entrance. Before installing the panels, clear the ground surface of all debris to ensure uniform contact with the ground surface. To prevent runoff from leaving the site, grade the stabilized entrance and route runoff through a sediment trap before it is discharged. The sediment trap should be located within 20 feet of each temporary construction entrance. If corrugated steel panels are part of the stabilized entrance design, they must be prefabricated and pressed or shop welded, with a slot or hooked section to facilitate coupling at the ends of the panels. Performance of the corrugated steel panels vary depending on the height of the ribs. If the resident engineer approves this type of design, then a standard plan T58 specifies a typical rib height of 1.5 inches. Tracking plates with a height less than 1.5 inches will not be allowed. In addition to the implementation of these BMPs, the stabilized entrance should be swept on an as-needed basis to further control sediment tracking from the construction site. Water pollution prevention inspections need to be performed routinely in order to evaluate BMP effectiveness and implement repairs or design changes as soon as possible. Inspections are most effective when conducted jointly by the contractor and Caltrans inspectors at intervals described in the project special provisions. Inspections are also required during dry weather to ensure proper implementation of BMPs, such as those for sediment tracking control that are not necessarily weather-related. During the rainy season, inspections must be completed by the contractor prior to and after storm events at 24-hour intervals during extended storm events or as required in the project special provisions. The project special provisions also require copies of the inspection checklist to be submitted to the resident engineer within 24 hours. Attachment H of the Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan and Water Pollution Control Program Preparation Manual must be completed during each inspection. This checklist must also be used for inspections unless the project special provisions require the contractor to use a different checklist. The contractor's Water Pollution Control Manager completes and signs the inspection form, keeps a copy in the on-site Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan, and submits the original completed inspection checklist to the resident engineer within 24 hours. The resident engineer then reviews the contractor's operations for water pollution control compliance and files the inspection form in the Category 20 file at Caltrans. If a specific deficiency is found during the inspection, then a corrective action should be implemented. If the deficiency is the result of an inadequate BMP, then other measures may be initiated to resolve the deficiency and ensure contract compliance. The State Highway construction project is now into its third month, and an inspection has been scheduled for today. Let's review what to look for during a stabilized construction entrance or exit inspection as the inspector completes his review. Check for proper function of the stabilized entrance, as well as any form of damage to the stabilized entrance. If damage is detected, repair it as necessary or as directed by the resident engineer. Determine whether the access point was installed with a length of at least 50 feet or 4 times the circumference of the largest construction vehicle tire. Check whether the rock used is approximately 3 to 6 inches in diameter, and if it was placed onto the geotextile fabric to a depth of at least 12 inches or to the depth recommended by the resident engineer. Check to make sure that there is no tracking of sediment or rocks onto the paved roadway. Also check that sweeping is being performed at an appropriate frequency. Caltrans requires the pavement be cleaned and sediment removed at least once a day while the temporary entrance is in use, or as often as necessary, as determined by the resident engineer. Check to determine whether soil and sediment or other materials tracked onto the existing pavement are entering drainage facilities. Implement the appropriate BMPs if necessary. Check all roadway ditches and make sure they are kept clear. Check to see if the construction entrance is clogged with sediment. If this occurs, remove the rock, dispose of the sediment, and replace the rock. During some inspections, you may find a stabilized entrance that was installed with the correct length and depth of rock, but was not graded properly, such that runoff is not routed through the sediment trap. If a sediment trap was not incorporated into the design, make a note on the inspection form, follow up with the contractor, and request an immediate corrective action. If the resident engineer approved the installation of corrugated steel panels, check to see if sediment has accumulated and needs to be removed, and follow up with the contractor suggesting increased sweeping and vacuuming of tracked materials to solve the problem. If the inspection indicates the tracking BMP effectiveness is marginal, define traffic patterns at the construction site, locate temporary construction entrances to confine traffic to its use barriers or other methods to prevent traffic from developing ad hoc egress routes. If the contractor does not respond to requests for sediment tracking control improvements, the resident engineer should follow up with the contractor and discuss the non-compliance issue. If the contractor continues to be non-responsive, the resident engineer will ensure contract compliance. The State Highway construction project is ongoing, and routine maintenance of the stabilized entrance is required to ensure effectiveness. Let's go through some of the typical problems that are encountered at stabilized construction entrances and the associated maintenance solutions. If access points require constant maintenance, then select proper stabilization material, or consider alternate methods for longevity, performance, and site conditions. If the aggregate is tracked onto the roadway, limit larger vehicles from construction exits, or use larger diameter material. If the aggregate material is being incorporated into the soil, then check the fabric to make sure that it is intact. Caltrans requires temporary construction entrances to be repaired or replaced the same day that damage occurs. If excessive sediment is tracked onto the roadway due to the site constraints or heavy usage, then increase the length of the stabilized exit. Consider increasing roadway sweeping and frequency, and consider drain inlet protection. If clogging is an issue, remove the excess sediment, or remove aggregate impacted by sediment and add another layer of aggregate, or install additional corrugated steel panels. If sediment-laden water is leaving the construction site, properly grade the stabilized entrance to prevent runoff from leaving the site and to ensure that runoff is subsequently routed to a sediment trapping device. If sediment is being tracked from numerous locations, limit access points and require their use. Ensure that all designated access points are stabilized. Remember, proper BMP function depends on proper selection, installation, inspection, and maintenance.